Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Coming up on today's show, we'll look at how America is quickly becoming a third world country. We'll find out what the top 1% have in common with sociopaths, and we'll tell you why Republicans think that only certain Americans deserve to have rights. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, remember, you've just stepped into the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
When you look at American education, our infrastructure, our employee wages, you'll notice a lot of similarities between the United States and third world developing countries. It hasn't been like that all the time. There's reasons for it. But the similarities don't end there. I have attorney Justin Berger with me to talk about it. Justin, you know, we've heard an awful lot about American exceptionalism. That seems to be the talking point that the GOP uses. But unfortunately, there's so much material coming out, whether it's magazine articles like the Rolling Stone magazine that we saw this last turnaround. We see New York Times coming out with information, Wall Street, Washington Post. Time after time, we're seeing these stories that really give rise to the doubt that American exceptionalism is real anymore. What's your take on it?
Well, we can be doing a lot better in a lot of ways. We're not fulfilling the promise of this country, of upward mobility, the American dream. It's simply not happening for too many people, and it's a variety of issues, from infrastructure to education to our criminal justice system. All of them are failing us in some ways, in some significant ways.
Sean McElwee's take on it in the Rolling Stone, he broke down various parts of what it is that we brag about. We brag about the idea, for example, that education in this country is so stellar that we're ahead of the rest of the world for at least the next millennium. We can just look at the facts and understand that that's not true. Give me your take just on this idea of how wrong this education argument is, that we are the leaders, that we are part of this American exceptionalism, and we don't have to do anything to correct the problem.
Well, that's exactly right. And the basic problem with our educational system in the United States is that it's primarily locally funded. So in poor communities, you got poor education. In rich communities, you got million-dollar education. So you've got this huge gap between the rich and the poor, people of color, and others. And as a result, you've got this massive achievement gap. And that's a fundamental problem that we got to take a fundamental look at ways to change.
Well, what we see is the gated communities seem to be okay. When we look at the affluent gated communities where the tax base is higher, where the attention to getting good teachers, getting good curriculum, all of that seems to work in those gated communities. But when you look at the statistics, I mean, the statistics are really overwhelming when they speak to the idea that if you're living not just in a low-income area, but even in a what we used to call middle-class income area, that the idea of a true successful education is just not what we're bragging about. Isn't part of it also, Justin, that you used to say, okay, I'm going to do something exceptional. I'm not just going to get out of high school and find a job. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get a college education, and that if I get that college education, I'm going to be a millennial that has great job opportunity. That doesn't bear itself out according to virtually all of the articles that are coming out right nowadays, all the books that are written about this nowadays, saying that that's a lie, that the average person comes out of college, they owe about $22,000. Their chances to get into a job market are very slim, aren't they?
That's right. The funding is not there for higher education, and most of the funding that is there are loans that a lot of kids coming out of college or adults coming out of grad school aren't able to repay because the high-paying jobs that they were promised simply aren't there.
What we find is we have the GOP saying, gee whiz, all you have to do is have the desire to work, and if you have this desire to work, everything's going to work out just fine. And the truth is, in America, the blind spot here in America is that college graduate is in such a long line for the job that even if he gets the job, the person that gives him the job can say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to pay you really even livable wage. I don't think we're going to give you any kind of pension program protection. I don't think I'm going to give you health care. I don't think I'm going to give you overtime rights that you might have somewhere else. Isn't it kind of, don't you get to the point where it's an employer's market, and that dream, that education dream, if I work hard, if I buckle down and I put my nose to the grindstone, when I come out, everything's going to work out. Aren't those factors that interfere with all that?
That's absolutely right. People are ending up in dead-end jobs with no benefits, inability to pay off those loans. Even folks I graduated from law school with, people that are graduating from law school now can't get jobs that pay off their loans. So imagine someone who doesn't have a professional degree, someone who's just got a basic undergraduate degree, trying to make it out there in the market with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense.
But don't you see, part of the problem is, Justin, we continue to buy into this. We even have the President of the United States constantly talking about American exceptionalism and how we're different from other developed countries. And the truth is we are different, and that is because we're in a decline and the other countries are not. If you take a look at infrastructure, doesn't infrastructure tell us a lot about how we're doing as a developed country?
Yeah. Our infrastructure is embarrassing in many ways. I don't know if you've flown into Dulles recently, which is our nation's capital primary airport, or LAX, which is where most people from foreign lands first encounter the United States. Some of the terminals in those airports are embarrassing in how out of date they are. Our bridges are crumbling. We've got 1 out of every 9 bridges in the United States is structurally unsound. That's just embarrassing. We should be doing much better than that.
Well, it's impossible to believe, but you have places like South Dakota, Alaska, Pennsylvania, where water is still delivered. Right, I couldn't make this up. It's delivered in its turn of the century wooden pipes, because we don't have the interest in updating that infrastructure. And I think every one of these writers, Justin, I think what's so important is every one of these writers says, before we can really do anything about this, we have to stop lying to ourselves about this notion that we have this great American exceptionalism. The truth is, when we can stop lying to ourselves, and we can have the leadership in this country stop making stuff up about how we're comparing to other developing nations, then we make real progress. Don't you see it that way?
Absolutely. Look, this is a great country in many ways, but we need to be more self-critical, because we can do better. We should do better. We should be more compassionate. We should be more just and empathetic, and we should focus more on equality for all of our citizens. And if we do that, we'll be a stronger country with a stronger democracy.
Historically, that has always proved to be the case, hasn't it? Justin Berger, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
The top 1% have been all over the media recently complaining that they're being attacked as being greedy and incompetent. So let's go beyond the superficial and look at the mind of the corporation, the mind of the CEO. Joining me now for this discussion is attorney Howard Nations to talk about what sociopathic and psychopathic really means where it comes to America's new corporate America. Howard, when we use the term psychopath and sociopath, we usually don't think of America's business elite as falling into that. But, in the last 2 years, there have been more books and stories written about the fact that if you take these people, these one percenters, these Tom Perkins types, and you are Sam Zell, these billionaires that are complaining about how they're just not being treated fairly, that if you take them and you just go step by step, analyze, are they psychopath, are they sociopath, it is almost a perfect fit. What's your take on all this new literature coming out?
It really is. The opposite ends of the spectrum here are that C. Wright Mills wrote The Sociological Imagination, talking about the relationship between society and individuals. Now, there's a new coined phrase at the other end of the spectrum, which is a sociopathic imagination. And that's the people who see only individuals, no connectivity with others, total lack of empathy or conscience or intuitive social awareness. The exemplar for this is Tom Perkins, a billionaire who wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal comparing the attacks on the 1%, believe this, to Nazi attacks on the Jews.
Yeah, Howard, Paul Rosenberg with Alternate, we've had him on the show many times. When I read, everybody should read his story, The Sociopathic 1%.
Right.
What he does is he takes these very points that we're reviewing right now, and he says, how does this affect business in America? Well, it does have a direct effect on business in America. It does have a direct effect on the relationship between the 1% and the 99% when you have the sociopaths and the psychopaths saying, collectivism, our care for a society as a whole is a huge mistake. We must care for the individual only. Isn't that kind of the bottom line to this?
Yes, it is. And the bottom line is that Ayn Rand, amazingly, an atheist, a Russian-born atheist, has become the philosopher du jour of the right wing and of the Republican Party, too. The bad thing about Perkins and Zell, you can look at them, but Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, says that they are not outliers, that paranoia and megalomania are quite pervasive in the 1%. And that what's happening here is that you see that corporate America has moved into this type of sociopathic callousness that we see manifested in such things recently as the legislation by Congress cutting food stamps, cutting off unemployment insurance. And they've adopted Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism.
Well, you know what, Howard? When Paul Rosenberg wrote this article, we're talking about the sociopathic 1%. One thing that he did, I thought, was brilliant. He took and he compared the period in America that's between 1973 and 2011 with a period that referred to as the golden age of capitalism, and that is 1947 through 73. Now, to me, what the stark difference is so startling that Rosenberg comes back and says, listen, for all these Margaret Thatcher types, the Tom Perkins types, the Zell types, the sociopath and psychopathic 1% who are still saying, just believe in us, right, believe in Ayn Rand and everything's going to work out. The comparisons are amazing, aren't they? They
are amazing, and the statistics from that era that you're talking about are so incredibly graphic. In the golden age of capitalism from 47 to 73, the bottom 99% had an increase of 4.1% per year. The top 1% had an increase of only 1.8% per year. The CEOs made 20 to 30 times what the employee made. From 73 through today, the real growth and real income of the 99% has been zero, and the 1% has had a 4.8% growth annually. And CEOs now make from 200 to 350 times what their employees make. Not only that, the CEOs used to rise and fall with the success of the company and with their success of their employees. Now, a CEO can just lead a company into virtually bankruptcy, and they can walk away with tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on their own with the golden parachutes.
Howard, you know what's so amazing to me is, do you remember the days when everybody used to talk about what a hero Alan Greenspan was? Yep. Oh, this is brilliant, man, just incredible. Well, now, first of all, Alan Greenspan actually he was one of the students that Ayn Rand developed. He actually wrote articles for Ayn Rand's newsletter that went out. He said Ayn Rand is the greatest mind in economic history. Now, Ayn Rand, you know the short story on her. She talks about how government's so bad. She was on welfare for about 30% of her life. Ayn Rand was on welfare. Now, at the same time she was on welfare, she was talking about collectivism is terrible for this country. Collectivism is terrible for the world. In other words, collectivism is we take care of each other.
Right.
But the point being, that's what Alan Greenspan bought into. What's your take on this? How did we make Alan Greenspan, who was a terrible, incompetent failure, into this great American hero?
Well, let's look at a second at what he bought into. Ayn Rand's philosophy is objectivism, which is selfishness is a virtue and altruism is a vice. In The Art of Selfishness, she set out the sociopathic sense of morality of its own, but she has a very important quote in there. If civilization is to survive, it's the morality of altruism that men have to reject. So that, and with Greenspan was a very early follower of hers from the 50s. And as you said, he wrote in her famous newsletters. Now, for him to go into government, and obviously if you look carefully at what he did, you see that he had the same total scorn for the ordinary citizen and the middle class that she did. It's absolutely astounding the effect that Ayn Rand has had in being adopted in the American economy today.
Well, and Rosenberg points out also, great, again, I can't say enough things about Paul Rosenberg's article in Alternet. It's just really well done.
Brilliant.
He talks about that Greenspan said we should have no regulations. It should be every man for themselves. It should be corporations can do whatever the hell they want to do, and this becomes a society of look out for yourself, caveat emptor. In other words, be careful, and if you fail, it's your fault. And then along comes Paul Ryan, also a student of Ayn Rand. Tell me about 30 seconds. Talk about Paul Ryan here.
Well, Paul Ryan embraced Rand from the beginning. He had all of his staff members read her books. And he's the Republican budget guru, the vice presidential candidate, and the 2016 presidential hopeful. Ryan, like most Republicans, has a very flexible political philosophy. As soon as it came out that Rand was also an atheist, he started running away from her. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at Atlas Shrugged, it begins with the question, who is John Galt? Now, through Rand and through looking at Greenspan, we know the answer. John Galt is the exemplar for corporate America. He's an exemplar for the libertarians and the right wing. And John Galt is the 1% who destroyed the American economy and now want to rebuild it by shipping jobs overseas and denying benefits to the 99%.
John Galt was the predator that Alan Greenspan and Paul Ryan in the Republican Party has embraced. That's who John Galt is.
Absolutely.
I can't say enough. Read this article if you haven't. Everybody out there, Paul Rosenberg on Alternet, The Sociopathic 1%. Howard, thanks for joining me, okay?
My pleasure, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power in programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable. If you live in a Republican-controlled state, first of all, sorry, but you've probably noticed that a lot of your fellow citizens are being denied basic civil rights. Do this, do your homework, and find out how they're going about it in your state. Join me now to explain why Republicans only want certain people to enjoy constitutional rights is attorney Dave TeSelle. David, it seems like the new GOP mantra is suppress the voice of everybody who disagrees with the GOP. These stories that are coming out, I saw this story, rights only for the right people. I mean, this is pretty much what's happening all across the country. And go look for this story in mainstream media. You won't find it. Go ahead and give me the 10,000 foot of this.
Well, the 10,000 foot, I think a good example, Mike, the best place to look is the new law that the Arizona legislatures tried to pass when they wanted to give businesses the right to discriminate against gay people, to not serve them food at their restaurants because of religious freedom. And they said that this is fair. And it was okay to treat gay people, homosexuals, as second-class citizens in this country. And they didn't see anything wrong with that.
In the name of religion.
Exactly.
In the name of religion. As a matter of fact, Jan Brewer tried to look like a hero by vetoing this, but the part of the story that wasn't told is Jan Brewer's team actually helped write this legislation, the very legislation that she ended up vetoing. This was all going during a time when they were sentencing gays to death in Uganda. I mean,
this is a good point. I mean, this is the one time that an issue like this actually made it to the national media, and that once people heard about it around the country, they stood up and said no and forced a governor who really backs this type of legislation to actually veto a bill her own people put forward. What the national media is not talking about is that Georgia, Idaho, Mississippi, Oklahoma, numerous other states are passing or trying to pass the very same law that was trying to be passed in Arizona, but nobody's talking about that on mainstream media.
But the point to the story is 15 years ago, we would have heard stories like this and we would have died laughing at how ridiculous the notion is. The media would have taken stories like this and it would have been on front page. Not anymore, because we've become, the idea you become what you think about.
Exactly.
The GOP has been thinking about trying to dehumanize virtually everybody who disagrees with them, and that's why in Ohio, the John Kasich issue.
That's a great point, Mike, because what's going on here is that the mainstream media is missing out on one of the biggest stories of our generation, which is the marginalization by race or by homosexuality of low-income people. And what's happening in Ohio is an example of that. The Republican Party and Governor Kasich have now passed laws to actually discriminate against low-income and African-American voters, and one of them being moving lower-income inner-city voting places, early voting places in Cincinnati, for example, to make them less accessible and less able to vote. Shutting down early voting, which is 77% African-American in Ohio. Shutting that down, the golden week they used to have, where someone could actually register to vote and then vote with an absentee ballot. They've cut that down, and their own people, the Republican Party, they can't even keep their mouth closed about this conspiracy. They actually, one of their elected officials admitted that the purpose of this was to suppress the African-American vote, to make sure that those people couldn't vote, and if they could, to make it more difficult for them to be able to do so there were less of them voting. That's what's going on in this country, and I don't see it anywhere, Mike. I don't see it anywhere.
David, honest to God, have you looked at Good Morning America lately?
Yes.
Have you looked at any of the idiot talk on talking shows? I mean, just take a minute. It is almost unbearable, but force yourself to sit there for 30 minutes and watch them talk about recipes or what somebody wore to an event the night before or who's having a baby. There is no news anymore. Now, because there's no news, we even have this story, to continue with this story, we have states attacking people's rights to even organize labor unions. Talk about this, and talk about how the GOP has made it part of their talking point.
We're talking about the First Amendment of the Constitution. We're talking about the right to peacefully assemble, the right to protest. Our founders found that to be one of the most important, if not the most important right to protect. They made it the First Amendment right. And we now have in states around the country where Republicans are suppressing the labor union's right to actually protest, to picket those who are responsible for not creating jobs, to picket those who are responsible for not making sure that people have a living wage, and they don't see the double standard that is going on here when they're the same ones that are fighting for the right to life protesters like the Wichita, Kansas
great example
where he goes to people's funerals, homosexuals' funerals, and protests, and they think they say First Amendment for that. But when people stand up as workers in this country for their right to be paid a fair wage, they want to stop that at every opportunity.
Let me name these names for you. I mean, this is like the center point for right-wing crazy. Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, the same states, exactly the same states that we just talked about, exactly the same places, but they're saying that a man or a woman should not be able to picket in front of the business that won't pay them living wage, that won't give them health care, that won't let them have overtime, that charge them exorbitant prices for virtually everything they try to buy in that organization, whether it is health care or pension or whatever it is. So in other words, you have this dichotomy in this country, at least where the GOP is concerned, that it's fine for us, but it's not fine for you to have your First Amendment rights protected, isn't it? Is that where this goes?
And not just those states, though, Mike. You look now, Michigan is a state where the labor union's right to picket is being and protest is being attacked. Ohio, as we talked about, it's coming to all of our states. We need to stand up and we need to get the word out that this double standard is what the Republican Party stands for.
Force yourself to watch Good Morning America or one of the main the CBS, NBC, ABC morning shows, and you tell me whether they talk about anything even halfway beyond dim-wit, whether they talk about issues like this. They don't. David, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you.
We were talking about CPAC. I was saying how I thought Paul Ryan's made-up story, even if you take it, forget the fact that it was made up, I thought his story was psychopathic in a way. And then the fact that he was too lazy to come up with a story and had to make up a fake lie that he borrowed from somebody else, I thought made it even worse.
Well, understand, this is the guy that was accused. This is also a guy that was accused of plagiarism, I think, on at least 3 occasions that I know of. So it's no surprise. I think the thing that struck me most, Sam, is just the rehash of scare the hell out of everybody. And I got to thinking as I was watching it, that's how they're made. That's how the Republican conservatives made. Yep. And so you remember the Republicans began, it was almost their nonstop scare campaign about 5 years ago. They babbled on like kids around a campfire telling ghost stories, moonbat stories that were so crazy that we're all wondering, do they need to be medicated? What's happening here? Why can't I connect with this? First of all, Obama was a black Muslim. He had built FEMA concentration camps, and he was holding disappeared Tea Party leaders there, and Glenn Beck knew exactly where it was, and all the CPAC people seemed to know where it was. Palin knew where it was, Bachmann knew where it was, but then so they scared the hell out of everybody. And then we heard that Obama had been planted in America as part of this terrorist cell. You remember that?
Right. He was a Manchurian candidate.
Manchurian candidate. He was intent on gaining control of the U.S. government. And then we heard that Obama, that horrible black-hearted man, had arranged for NATO troops to come to America and gather up all our guns. Now I would like to say that this was just happening in Glenn Beckville. But no, this was happening in Republican leadershipville.
Yep.
The very people at the top of the pecking order, the very people that were showing up at places like CPAC, people like Mitch McConnell, people like Sarah Palin, Rubio, Bachmann, all of the regular crazies. These were the people that were telling these stories. These narratives were being promulgated by these nuts. So there was almost a Republican wingnut scare story almost every day, and it drove the real conservative freaks. I don't know if you followed this story. I think it came out of Mother Jones or maybe Rolling Stone, one of them. Talked about the move to Montana, the move to Colorado, where they would take their survival supplies and their AK-47s. They'd prepare for this political apocalypse that was always just going to happen right around the corner. And then this insane babble was almost every day. And so that's what we heard at CPAC again. There was no reason. There was no reason for any of that discussion, except the Republicans know their base real well.
Right.
They know their base better, I can promise you, than the Democrats do. Democrats have lost contact with their base. The Republicans haven't. They understood that if they just scare the living hell out of everybody, out of their faithful followers, then they can motivate those people to, on issues like gun control or, keep them in line on Obamacare or keep them in line on immigration. And especially immigration. I mean, after all, not having an AK-47 to hold off the Mexican hordes or not having a 9mm to stop Obamacare folks from putting your mom and dad on an old people's kill list, that's just part of the plan. They understood that this is how we scare people. So why do the Republicans know that they can do this? Because they have, time after time, focused it.
Yeah.
And now you and I have talked about this story. It's almost an unbelievable story. But now it's not just speculation, Sam. Now we have empirical data. We have MRIs. We have CAT scans. We have MMPIs, personality profile testing. It shows that radical conservatives just are built different. They are built biologically to always be afraid. And my point to all this is, even though you're sitting listening to these moonbat, these, Ann Coulter type wingnuts in CPAC, the truth is they understand their base better than Democrats do.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when they talk about the sort of the raging hordes and all of the carjacking and the knockdown games and this notion that they're being attacked, you can take that same sort of dynamic and you can apply it to the immigration fight. We're being overrun by immigrants.
Wayne LaPierre, just like we just heard, that was his discussion. Part of his.
And you could also take that frame to marriage equality. It's not that we're denying rights to people that we have. It is they're attacking the traditional marriage. You can put it on the context of free universal lunches at schools. They're attacking our dignity, our liberty by actually letting our kids eat. This is the context in which they frame everything. I think you're absolutely right about this, Pap. I mean, I think you can listen to that LaPierre speech, and you can hear the conservative mantra, which is they or it. Whatever it or they is, you can put whatever you want into that slot, is coming to get us and take something from us. And they have this mentality that the world is attacking them, that there are foreigners, there are Muslims, there are immigrants, there are gays, there are feminists, whatever it is, they're coming to take from us.
These are the people at the water cooler. They have the same personality. They've been terrified since they were in Oshkosh jeans as a child. And all of this data is overwhelming. It says, their brain looks different, their CAT scan looks different, Their MRIs look different. The emphasis points in their brain are different. Their personal profiles are different. They turn out to be teabag Republican conservatives. I mean, it's not an oversimplification. The empirical data is there now.
A lot of Republican insanity to report on. It wasn't all just at CPAC this past week. There was a story. We should be really careful here, too, because I don't want
Janine,
Janine's cousin, actually, Pat Garofalo, to get caught up in this. He's an editor over at U.S. News.
Not the Representative Pat Garofalo Republican nut.
Indeed. Well, this guy, he's a Minnesota lawmaker. His name is Representative Pat Garofalo, and
spelled the same, by the way.
It's spelled the same, but he's talking now that if I mean I don't know what inspired this tweet, frankly. But it's stunning. This is
what inspired it was CPAC. This
right.
Brought out every crazy felt empowered. They felt emboldened when they heard all the crazy McConnell and Bachmann and Coulter, and when they hear all the crazies, they're emboldened. So pick it up from there.
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that because and the sad thing for Republicans is that they have access to Twitter and video exists now that can be widely disseminated.
How do you do that with just thumbs, though? I don't get it. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, maybe they do that speak-to-text technology. But so this guy, Representative Pat Garofalo, tweets, let's be honest, 70% of teams in NBA could fold tomorrow, and nobody would notice a difference with possible exception of increase in street crime.
Okay, how did his compadres react to that?
Well, I mean, more or less, I think many of them said, well, he misspoke, and he went on to he was asked to come on to a Minneapolis TV station, to face the obvious claims that it was a racially tinged tweet. And he goes, well, I was talking about the NBA's high arrest rate. Now, this is just absurd. There's a huge arrest rate. Well, I don't know that's huge. I don't know that's huge in NBA, but there's a pretty big arrest rate in football. And you see problems in baseball. I mean, you see it.
Well, lacrosse. How about lacrosse? How about
Yeah.
Duke lacrosse team?
Yeah, indeed. And he says, I really don't understand how being critical of a culture of pro athletes has anything to do with race. This is a behavior that transcends the race of the athlete and seems to be a culture in all professional sports.
Okay, let me ask you something. Do these Republicans who now are being told to use tweet by leadership, do they not know that other people read the tweets, or do they think that they're just tweeting to? I mean, do they not know that when you put a tweet out there, people read it?
Well, Pap, I mean,
and then when they go on, or that when they go on, and they're on television speaking, that people might be actually seeing they're speaking on television.
I think you're absolutely right about CPAC. I mean, I think what happens is whether they're there or not, as that's going on, it just it increases their delusion level, where they actually think this is the mainstream perspective of America, and undoubtedly, this guy might be more at home down in the South, but when you're in the Republican Party, when you're a Republican lawmaker, you are trapped in this world where you think it's 1963 or something, and we're living in a much more regressive world. And if you're one of those economic conservatives, maybe you're hoping that we're living closer to the late 1800s or the early 1900s, or I should say 2000s. But, this is also, we talked about Wayne LaPierre at CPAC. This is more of the same about these cultural touchstones.
Well, how about the George Zimmerman story? Okay, George Zimmerman, for those that you don't know, he shows up at a gun show. They urge him. He's the big draw, you see. You're going to get George Zimmerman in here, who murdered somebody unnecessarily, Trayvon Martin, just murdered him, gunned him down. So you have this guy who now is black young man with a hoodie. So it was okay to murder him, according to the to the jury, apparently, and according to that, to that whole notion of real knee-jerk conservatives. But anyway, so he murders Trayvon Martin, and he becomes a celebrity, or really, literally becomes a celebrity, and he's the celebrity showing up at a gun show, and he's signing autographs. Now, it's one thing for us to regard some buffoon like Paris Hilton or Kim Kardashian or one of the bachelorettes as a celebrity. I mean, that's bad enough. I mean, that's so vulgar you almost want to puke. But here you have a murderer. This guy committed murder. It's very clear he committed murder. Everybody knows he committed murder. And even though the jury let him off, I mean, you had a bunch of knee-jerk conservative nut jurors down there and in probably one of the most conservative places in the state of Florida, and they let a murderer go. But so now the murderer becomes a celebrity at a gun show signing autographs. Pick it up.
Yeah, it's stunning. And I think it shows that this guy basically just had to kill a kid to become a celebrity. And, this is more of the sort of the cultural identification that conservatives have locked themselves into, where they have to lionize a guy who by anybody's account, did something horrible. And, even if he was not convicted of murder,
even after that,
he killed this guy.
Beats his wife. My God, what was there? Story after story after. I mean, it was like Zimmerman had lost his mind. But that's okay. That's okay for this crowd who calls himself Teabag Republican. This is who they want. This is the new America that they're looking for. And he's now, a celebrity superstar signing autographs at a gun show.
The Pap Attack.
In the early 1970s, a series of congressional hearings took place in D.C., and they became known as the Church Committee hearings. The results of those hearings were remarkable, mostly because the conclusion was that America had become a spook nation, where the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and the Pentagon were not only spying on virtually every kind of American, but they were using tactics that Joseph Stalin and J. Edgar Hoover had developed to aggressively target personal enemies. And most any human being or organization that was mildly, even remotely suspect was a personal enemy. That included Catholic bishops, it included priests, religious activists who spent time building socially responsible churches. It included social activists ranging from folk singers like Pete Seeger, who just recently died, to pot-smoking rock and roll bands that were supposed to be a huge danger to the American public. The J. Edgar Hoover crowd had not only spied on activists like Martin Luther King, they actually used the material they found on Reverend King to try to push him towards suicide. They wanted him to commit suicide because in his mind he was an enemy of J. Edgar Hoover. It was a period when just being black was enough to be targeted by the likes of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. When Hoover wasn't spending his time cross-dressing in fashionable Carmen Miranda or Shirley Temple outfits, he was devising schemes for legally, illegally, you name it, blackmailing congressmen, presidents, senators, mayors, governors, and any public servant who he needed to scare the hell out of. That was J. Edgar Hoover when he wasn't cross-dressing. The problem was that his side was typically dark, dank, and mostly dirty. He tried to pull everybody to his side. It was spook work at its very worst. The very idea that the FBI still maintains the name of J. Edgar Hoover on the side of its D.C. building is almost dark humor. Republican icon Dick Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover became pals only because J. Edgar had a file on Tricky Dick that no doubt would have put Dick in prison for a very long time. So Republican icon, Tricky Dick, with open arms, put in place the J. Edgar Hoover, Joseph Stalin formula for dealing with Republican enemies, political enemies, Democratic enemies, all enemies, anybody who J. Edgar Hoover didn't like. But it was hugely Republican-driven. It was one of the most aggressive spying operations to hit American soil. Well, the Frank Church Committee, they found that labor unions were not only being spied on behalf of union-busting megacorporations, they were being infiltrated with spook plants who would document everything that happened at private leadership meetings and no doubt later share that information with Tricky Dick's most important corporate political contributors. Journalists, well, of course, they were fair game with the Hoover crowd, and it was hugely funded and poorly supervised CIA who was really going after the journalists. The CIA had listening devices spread out in homes and in offices of newspaper editors and writers and TV, radio reporters who J. Edgar or Dick Nixon believed to be personal enemies, which was virtually everybody in the media. In fact, the FBI and the CIA had taken the art of spying on journalists to such a level that they also recruited journalists in something called Operation Mockingbird. Go take a look at this one. It was to help promote and support the dirty tricks and spook activity of the CIA. The Mockingbird journalists some question is, how were they recruited? Were they recruited because they had a dossier on them, or were they recruited because they were paid? But the Mockingbird journalist operation was a group of high-profile journalists who wrote favorable stories about the virtues and the wisdom of the CIA and FBI spook activity. They promoted the idea that spying is good for all of us, no matter how abused the process might be. The same thing that Dianne Feinstein has promoted for the last 6 years. The Church Committee was mildly successful in temporarily interrupting the spy free-for-all that J. Edgar Hoover and the CIA had launched against the peace activists. They had launched it against environmental activists. They had launched it against political opponents, teachers' unions, churches, Congress, and even the court system, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But now we see that the spooks are back in full spook costume. And you have to love the fact that they're spending so much time spying on the most dysfunctional Congress in the history of this country. We can only conclude that they captured very little serious intel from Congress, because this Congress for the last 6 years has done so little that could actually be considered serious business. But I'll bet you this. I'll bet they've collected a bunch of personal information about congressmen and senators and even this president for their files. Dianne Feinstein is mad as hell today, even though Feinstein has always been the Democrat big mouth who day after day for years has told us that the CIA and the FBI and the NSA and the ABC and XYZ spying organizations should have unrestrained right to put spook boxes in our bedrooms, in our bathrooms, in our mosques, in our churches. And according to Dianne, they should also have the right to drone blow the hell out of anyone, American or otherwise, who falls into the definition of threat according to that ridiculous subjective view of spooks. That's what we're counting on. We're counting on them to tell us subjectively. Maybe the one-time spook supporter Feinstein is upset because the FBI maybe has information about possible sweetheart government contracts that have been pushed in the direction of her multimillionaire government contractor husband. I don't know that, but you have to wonder, why is she so upset? She supported it for such a long time. Right now, it's too early to tell, but just maybe the brain-dead politicos who've trampled on constitutional rights to privacy, for us, everybody, maybe they'll have the good sense to put together another Frank Church-style committee. It's clear that that may be the only way that they're going to be able to protect themselves from the monster that they created. They created this monster. Wasn't just George Bush, wasn't just Obama, wasn't just Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan. They created this monster because they became so damn lazy and so captive by the subcontracting industry that they bought into everything that was being sold. Wholeheartedly, they promoted it. Oh, yeah. But when the spooks were only abusing the privacy of you and me and not them, that was okay. But today it's not okay with Dianne Feinstein. Why don't you play cut number 1? Let's see what Dianne has to say about all this.
Based on what Director Brennan has informed us, I have grave concerns that the CIA's search may well have violated the separation of powers principles embodied in the United States Constitution, including the Speech and Debate Clause. It may have undermined the constitutional framework essential to effective congressional oversight of intelligence activities or any other government function. Besides the constitutional implication, the CIA's search may also have violated the Fourth Amendment, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, as well as Executive Order 12333, which prohibits the CIA from conducting domestic searches or surveillance.
Let's see what Brennan has to say. Brennan says it didn't happen. Play cut number 2.
As far as the allegations of CIA hacking into Senate computers, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we wouldn't do that. I mean, that's just beyond the scope of reason. And when the facts come out on this, I think a lot of people who are claiming that there has been this tremendous sort of spying and monitoring and hacking will be proved wrong.
We don't know at this point, really. We don't know whether this is true or not. But isn't it time to take a look? Isn't it time for a Frank Church committee to start looking to find out how crazy has this become? Is it a rerun of the time when we had the NSA and the CIA spying on churches and priests and journalists and everybody? Now, right now, as we're speaking, I'm getting emails from people saying, oh, well, you won't be so happy when Russia attacks us, will you? Really, Philip McGuire, is that the best you have? The truth is, we can do both. We can protect privacy in this country and not let the NSA and the FBI and the CIA run crazy the same way they did under J. Edgar Hoover and the same way they did under that Republican icon, Tricky Dick Nixon, to where they were in our bedrooms. They were using the power of spying to punish people. So isn't it time that we look at this? Whether or not this bears itself out, we don't know. But Feinstein says it's taken place. Brennan says it didn't happen. Isn't it time for us to at least be serious about this and ask ourselves, have we returned to the point where the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA is running wild without any metrics about what's acceptable or what's not acceptable? Have we gotten to the point where we can't even have congressional hearings to ask the question? Has our Congress become so dysfunctional that they don't even know what the history books said we found about the church hearings in the 1970s, when everybody in the 1970s was saying, oh, this wasn't going on? They're not spying on Catholic priests. They're not spying on churches. They're not spying on teacher unions. They're not infiltrating labor unions. They're not trying to victimize folk singers like Pete Seeger. They're not doing any of that. And these boneheads like this Philip McGuire, who says, "You won't be laughing if Russia attacks us." Philip McGuire says that. And that's always the comeback, isn't it? Fear, fear, fear. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio or on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire. Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power in programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable.